I think it's a pretty hard way to begin your morning talking about the federal budget. And I'm always reluctant to enter into the subject when people have food on the table, but such is the mission this morning. Now, you notice the title of the talk is Mission Not Accomplished. I suppose it depends on what the mission is. But as if the mission is a sustainable fiscal policy that will improve the outlook for future generations, we haven't done that. The reason that I think it's important to start with that message is that the attitude in Washington at the moment is that the federal budget is something that we can put on the back burner. You know, for the past 3 years, we've had big fights about the federal budget. It started around 2010. The Bowles-Simpson Commission reported, and the commission that I was on, the Domenici-Rivlin Task Force, reported with big global plans for how we could bring about a sustainable federal budget. And we had high hopes that there would be some sort of grand bargain between the two parties that would put everything on the table and negotiate some hard choices. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. There were some close calls, some meetings, but things sort of broke apart. And ultimately, there were a lot of showdowns over appropriations bills that weren't passed, and so the government would shut down. There were fights over the debt limit with the U.S. credit worthiness at stake. There was something called a fiscal cliff a couple of years ago, where there are a lot of expiring provisions that were going to take place, and people thought, well, maybe that's an action-forcing event. They'll surely have to do something. But each time, at each critical moment, there was kind of a minimalist deal that got us over the current crisis, but didn't do anything really beyond that. And the two sides decided, sort of at the end of last year, that they were sick of this crisis management thing for a while. They were going to come to an agreement. And so Patty Murray from the Senate Democratic Budget Committee and Paul Ryan from the House Budget Committee got together and came up with a deal which was far from a grand bargain and far from a comprehensive plan to bring about a sustainable fiscal path. The purpose, though, was to put the federal budget on the back burner, to stop arguing about it for a while and to get past the next election. And they went into it specifically with the idea that if they tried to accomplish anything meaningful, they wouldn't get anything done. So they set out to accomplish a deal that didn't do much, and they succeeded. And that's kind of where we are now. The federal budget, they sort of declared victory over the federal budget and decided not to argue about it for at least till after this election. I suspect not until after the next presidential election. That is why we now have budget caps that have been agreed to in place for not just this fiscal year, but next fiscal year, to avoid a shutdown. The debt limit has been extended through March of 2015, but I don't think it's going to be a problem even then. There'll probably be some sort of a deal to get past the presidential election. So if we're looking for big news on the federal budget, it's probably going to be after 2016. 2017 seems to be like the next big push when the new president, whoever that is, comes into office, and probably at that time will include a major fiscal policy package as part of their new agenda. And that's why I think it is important already to start thinking about the federal budget and fiscal sustainability as an issue in the 2016 presidential campaign. So I was in New Hampshire this week. I've been in New Hampshire quite a bit. I'm going to Iowa on Monday, Sunday night actually. I'm not running for anything, I promise. But I do think, and by the way, nobody in either state has told me, why are you here? This is crazy. You're talking about something that's going to happen 2 years from now. It's just sort of accepted that you have to start getting these issues talked about if you're going to be organizing for 2016. So when I say the mission is not accomplished, it really is about the mission of, we thought of bringing about a sustainable fiscal path, which we don't have. I know that this group heard from David Walker a few years ago on a presentation, and Dave and I at that time were doing a nationwide fiscal wake-up tour. Dave was the Controller General, and when I think back about the deficits in those days and what we were warning about, my God, we were we were optimists. I mean, if we had no idea that things would get so bad so quickly. That in terms of the short-term deficits, you know, what happened in 2008, 2009, because of the Great Recession, because of continuing war costs, suddenly the budget deficit, which was around $200 billion at the time Dave and I were warning about long-term trends and coming down, suddenly ballooned to over $1 trillion and stayed there for 4 years. Now that is beginning to recede as the economy picks up, not nearly as fast as anybody would like, but there is economic growth back. The war costs are receding. So those temporary factors that traditionally cause budget deficits to expand are now receding, and we're getting back to something that looks a little bit more quote-unquote normal, even though the budget deficit last year was $680 billion, which I hope is not normal. But because it's not over $1 trillion, it's looking better. And that's the kind of thing that gets the Ryan Murray minimalist budget agreement done, because the immediate pressure for a deficit deal has been alleviated by the deficit that's coming down. And people can say, wow, well, a few years ago we'd have thought a deficit of $680 billion was catastrophic. But now it looks like this is great, the deficit is really falling like a stone. So, but that alleviates some of the pressure. The thing is that even though the deficit is coming down in that sense, the longer-term problem that Dave and I were warning about years ago on the fiscal wake-up tour is not only still there, nothing's been done about it. And so the longer-term trend is now the dangers there are even closer. And yet the attitude in Washington is, wow, we weathered that storm. We don't need to worry about the budget deficits for a while.